Hello, my name is Ellie Gettinger. I'm the Education Director at Jewish Museum Milwaukee, and I am here today to say Happy Election Day, Wisconsin. There's a primary election, so if you haven't voted and you're watching live, make sure you get out and do that safely. And to also talk today about another point in our democracy where things seemed a little fraught and a little scary. So in 2018, JMM had an exhibit called Blacklist, the Hollywood Red Scare. And we got to do a lot of really fantastic research and explore this story. So I thought today, especially because tomorrow we're going to be talking with author Larry Tye about his new book, Demagogue, which is about Joe McCarthy, that let's explore another side of the Red Scare. Let's explore the House Un-American Activities Committee and their work specifically with Hollywood, which was the centerpiece of our exhibit. This exhibit really kicked off by looking at the House Un-American Activities Committee. And as we're thinking about the House Un-American Activities Committee, this is five of the members as we're sitting in 1947 when the HUAC Hollywood Hearings started. But the House Un-American Activities Committee actually was founded a decade before in the 1930s and initially was founded to respond to the threat of Nazism in the country. And then as a way of kind of engaging broader support for this committee, communism was thrown in. By the early 1940s, communism, even at the start of World War II, has become more of the focus of HUAC, and they're starting to look at Hollywood, but things get put on the back burner because of World War II. And after World War II, with the separation of Europe between communist and non-communist countries and all of the kind of post-war fear, HUAC seizes this opportunity to look at all sorts of different facets of American life. One of those facets is Hollywood. So in calling people before Congress, they divide people up into friendly and unfriendly witnesses, and they subpoena them. Seated here, you see Robert Taylor, an actor who was in a movie during World War II called Song of Russia that was seen as being communist propaganda. And then you also have Ring Lardner, one of the Hollywood 10. The big difference, I would say, in looking at the friendly versus unfriendly witnesses are two big things. One is the relative power of these two groups of witnesses, and two, the way in which they were treated before Congress. And so this is kind of a broad list of the people who were called. I will tell you the friendly is only selected. The unfriendly, this is everybody who was called. 19 people were subpoenaed to be unfriendly witnesses. They only got through 11 of them. And if you look at these names, for the most part, unless you're like me and you're a Blacklist obsessive, Albert Maltz and Samuel Ornitz and Adrian Scott are not going to be people that you're like, oh yeah, let me tell you about Adrian Scott and his film experience. Instead, you're kind of like, well, who are these guys? On the other hand, if you look at the friendly witnesses, these are people who have big name recognition. Gary Cooper, big time actor, Walt Disney, Louis B. Mayer, founder of MGM, Ronald Reagan. This is really his introduction to political power in this moment. So it's kind of an interesting list. And in asking the friendly witnesses questions, they kind of give them these softballs. Tell us about communists, especially the actors. To some extent, the producers got raked over the coals a little bit more. And the producers, like Jack Warner, really started saying, no, we'll do anything to get communists out of our ranks. Don't worry, we're not interested in having communists in Hollywood. He even compares communists in Hollywood to termites, and he says that he would hire a pest removal company to take care of them. On the other side, the unfriendly witnesses really are limited in what they can say in front of Congress. They're asked one question: are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? And they really don't have much leverage in answering this. The other thing that's kind of interesting about this evolution is the committee poses the initial question. It's not about are there communists in Hollywood, but is there communist subversion in Hollywood? And almost immediately there's a shift on those unfriendly witnesses to, instead of being focused on whether they've been using communist propaganda in their film, to say, are you communists at all? It's a really interesting change. And one of the things that I think is striking is being a member of the Communist Party at that point was not illegal. So it really changes the way in which people feel like they can associate in America. Albert Maltz, one of the Hollywood 10, says the following when he is allowed to testify. He's actually one of the few that actually gets a statement out in front of the committee. Most people are cut off and held in contempt. He says, if the rights of any one citizen can be invaded, then the constitutional guarantees of every other American have been subverted, and no one is any longer protected from official tyranny. You know, it's a big statement here. And what happens is all of the Hollywood 10 are held in contempt because they refuse to answer the questions. They claim their First Amendment rights. You heard me right. I didn't say Fifth Amendment. They say that we are protected under the First Amendment. Whatever we say here, this is under whatever we have done, whatever sort of organization that we've had in the past, that is protected under the multitude of rights under the First Amendment, both assembly and speech, that those two would guarantee that we're safe here. So Congress, though, finds them in contempt, and they vote by a huge margin to say this should go to, these people should go to prison. And then it becomes a really long legal battle, which we'll get back to in a second. So hold on to that legal battle. The people, as I said, who were the subpoenaed, those 19, and then there are 10 who testify and take the first. There's one, Bertolt Brecht, who testifies and actually flees the country the next day. But then there are a number of big name Hollywood celebrities who come out in support of the Hollywood 10 at first. And if you look at this picture, you can see in the middle are Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, probably the best known people. Danny Kaye's in this, Paul Heinrich, a bunch of really big name stars have chartered a jet and they've flown to DC to show their support for the Hollywood 10. In addition, they found something called the Committee for the First Amendment. And on this page here, which I'm not sure you can see, there are even bigger names still. You know, you've got Betty Davis, Katharine Hepburn, Gregory Peck. A lot of big names, Walter Houston, are saying we support the rights of people. And especially one of my favorite lines in this is any attempt to curb the freedom of expression and to set arbitrary standards of Americanism is itself disloyal to both the spirit and the letter of the Constitution. So they are taking this active stance. This actually was sent to the House Un-American Activities Committee, and it's in their folder in DC. One of the interesting things I think there is that they have things starred. I'm not exactly sure why certain names are starred and others are not. They have a radio broadcast, and it's a 2-night radio broadcast that goes all over the country, and even more big names come out. Gregory Peck, Frank Sinatra, Gene Kelly. Gregory Peck, I personally love this. There is more than one way to lose your liberty. It can be torn out of your hands by a tyrant, but it can also slip away day by day while you're too busy to notice or too confused or too scared. I certainly think there's some interesting resonance in that statement. So you've got this big name support, and then you get a lot of pushback from the Hollywood establishment. The Hollywood 10 actually embarks on a really long legal struggle, which takes years and years. It's 3 years of prolonged battles through the court system to fight the fact that they have a jail sentence and a fine. And it ends up going to the Supreme Court, where they say, we're not going to make a decision. It goes back to the federal court, in which they are found guilty, and they end up going to jail for about 6 months on average. And they all are fined, I think, around $5,000. And it's this real statement that says, this is a time in which these people can go to jail for their political party membership, which is never actually confirmed through any of the hearings, but for the fact that they aren't willing to answer that question, are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? The industry, though, is the interesting thing here. 6 weeks after the hearings end, and remember, they're hearings, they're not trials. 6 weeks after these hearings, a number of people from the industry get together to form a statement of what to do. And in that 6 weeks, there's been intense pressure from the government, from organizations like the American Legion, from the church, from all sorts of different bodies saying, what are you going to do about communism, Hollywood? And all of these different film studios get together and they form a statement. We will not knowingly employ a communist or a member of any party which advocates the overthrow of the government of the United States by force or by an illegal or unconstitutional method. This is then the thing that sets the blacklist into place. So the hearings triggered this, but the actual action of keeping people from working in Hollywood for the next decade and a half, that is Hollywood instigated. That is something that the institutional, the studios say, we are going to take this on to make sure that we continue to be profitable, to make sure that we don't lose audience, to make sure that people don't feel like we're too far left. This then has repercussions on all of those big stars that we just saw. They don't really feel comfortable making statements like this. They're nervous that this is going to say, ooh, are they communists too? And suddenly you see a big retraction from that group. Humphrey Bogart famously is on the cover of Photoplay saying, I'm no communist, and you get all of these kinds of rebuttals, and you get this real quiet from the industry about what is going on inside of it. So that is a very brief introduction to the House Un-American Activities Committee. One big question I got when this exhibit was open is, what about McCarthy? Tomorrow, we have the opportunity to talk to Larry Tye about McCarthy. But let me tell you, when we're talking about Hollywood, McCarthy is really separate. And in fact, his famous speech in Wheeling, West Virginia doesn't even happen until 1950, 3 years after the HUAC hearings, the Hollywood hearings ended. So it's a really interesting context to understand that despite McCarthyism becoming the overriding name for the entirety of the Red Scare, he's not actually involved in the Hollywood piece pretty much at all. Thanks so much for joining me for this museum moment. If you'd like this or any of our museum moments, please feel free to drop by our website, jewishmuseummilwaukee.org. You can make a donation, you can leave comments, and join us again on Thursday when we look at censorship and the FBI in this period.